All right, welcome back to the channel. So, Errol Spence Jr. gave an interview, and he says that Danny Garcia was a better fighter than Shawn Porter. And after listening to him and watching these fights, I think both of these guys are going to help him to knock out Terence Crawford. Let's talk about that in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. So yesterday I had a really good listen to the PBC's podcast. It's about an hour and a half long podcast. I really enjoyed it. And on that podcast, it had two interviews. One interview was with Derek James, the trainer of Errol Spence Jr., and the other interview that they did was with Errol Spence Jr. himself. And Errol Spence Jr. gave some very, very enlightening information, very good questions asked by the host. And one of the question was, who are the best fighters that you fought before? And, who do you think your best wins are? Errol Spence Jr. gave an answer to that I thought was very, very surprising. And then after I listened to that, I went back and watched both fights and then watched Terence Crawford. I was really into it last night. And I was like, okay, man, no, Errol Spence Jr. is going to beat this guy. Let me tell you what it is, what I'm talking about. So Errol Spence was asked, who does he think his best opponent was or his best fight was? He said in order, number one was Kell Brook, number two was Danny Garcia, and number three was Shawn Porter. Now, the Kell Brook, that makes sense to me why he would say that was his best win, and it could have been the best fighter that he was fighting because at the time, Kell Brook was considered to be, by many, the best welterweight in the world, even though he was coming off of a loss where he got his eye socket broken, 2 weight classes up against Gennady Golovkin. But at the time, many people thought he was the best welterweight, and he was a very, very good fighter, was not completely shot at the time, and Errol considers that to be his biggest win. Errol had to go over there to the UK to get the win when a lot of other people wouldn't fight him. In the United States, specifically, Shawn Porter wouldn't fight him, Danny Garcia wouldn't fight him, and Keith Thurman wouldn't fight him. So he went over there to the UK, beat in 2017, beat Kell Brook, brought the belt back. Without a doubt, I can understand why he would say that's his best win. And that was probably the best fight that he's had because that has been about, except for the fact that Shawn Porter didn't get knocked out. I mean, I think that fight was really, really competitive with Kell Brook until Errol got him up out of there, the great until. But the next two are the ones that I want to talk about, where he said that Danny Garcia was the better win over Shawn Porter. Now, I don't just think that he means better win in the sense that I was coming back from a car accident. People were doubting me. Oh, what a spectacular win. I was listening carefully. I listened carefully to what Derek James had to say about Danny Garcia, about what Errol Spence Jr. had to say about Danny Garcia, and also what they had to say about Shawn Porter. And I really do believe that they have a higher, I wouldn't say a higher amount of respect, but the technical skills of Danny Garcia, it's clear that they were more worried about Danny Garcia than they were worried about Shawn Porter. And to me, that makes, after listening to their explanation, it makes a lot of sense. And what Derek James said was basically this, like Shawn Porter is a rougher fighter than Errol Spence, than Danny Garcia is, right? And he is I believe he's a more versatile fighter than Danny Garcia is. He can fight on the outside. He can get really, really rough with you. He can fight on the inside. He just has a bunch of different looks. He's very, very stocky, and he's short. So for a guy like Errol Spence, if you watch that fight closely enough, Errol likes to dig to the body and likes to get in on the body, and he was having a very hard time with Shawn Porter. Well, I wouldn't say a very hard time, but it was more difficult with him for Errol to get low with Shawn Porter, right? To keep his shoulders lower than Shawn Porter's, because the saying in sports, low man wins. And Errol is really trying to get up underneath the jab, get inside the chest of Shawn Porter. And Shawn Porter's size, I think, caused some difficulties. I also think that Shawn Porter's had a couple tricks up his sleeve during that fight, like spinning out of the corner and flipping it on Errol real quick. Like Errol would work him to the corner, but I think Shawn was letting him force him back to the corner, and Shawn was letting Errol push him back to the corner so that Shawn could spin off and then have Errol in the corner. Now, like I said, I rewatched that fight last night. Even though there were a lot of those things going on, Errol, even when Shawn turned him onto the ropes and got Errol's back on the ropes, Errol was getting the better of those exchanges. But I think that was a big dog fight. The worry that they had, though, from Danny Garcia is a little bit different because Derek James was saying, like, he was screaming at Errol Spence Jr. during the fight, like, pay attention, pay attention, stay focused, right? And the reason that they said that was because of something that's special about Danny Garcia. What Derek James said is that Danny Garcia is the type of guy that lets you get comfortable hitting him. So you may think that you got to, that it's just easy, that it's easy breezy with Danny Garcia. You're landing punches, you're landing shots. But what Derek James said is that it's almost like Danny Garcia will let you have a little bit so that when you hit him, he's hitting you. So he said he's not like just throwing punches when you're throwing and looking for holes. He's like, no, Danny Garcia is waiting for you to actually hit him. And when you're extended and in that position to contact, that's when he's coming with that no-look left hook because you're all the way extended when your hand connects. So he just felt that with Danny Garcia, that there was more urgency to be seriously focused, and that it was those type of things that made Danny Garcia more dangerous. But one of the things that I noticed about Errol Spence that I think really helped him overcome both Danny Garcia and both Shawn Porter, and I really do believe is what's going to lead to him. I think he's got a good chance of knocking out Terence Crawford after watching these fights, and that is the precision of his punches. When you watch Errol fight Danny, when you watch Errol fight Shawn, Errol Spence punches are landing on this, and this is something that Derek James talked about. They're landing on the same spot every time. So he's like, when Errol is hitting you coming around your guard, he's not hitting you here, and then maybe sometimes it's here and other times here. He's like, no, Errol is hitting you here on the neck every time. Like, and when he's going for the liver shot, that he's putting that shot in one particular place every time so that you get more wear and tear on those particular spots. Now, how that transitions, like watching the Danny Garcia fight. I haven't seen the Danny Garcia fight again, but I was there in the arena for the Danny Garcia fight, so I really saw how that played out. Just watched the Shawn Porter fight, but again last night. And what else as far as Terence Crawford goes? Look, man, when you are talking about Errol Spence Jr. picking which is the best fight that he's had, was it Kell Brook or is it Shawn Porter or is it Danny Garcia, right? You look at these guys' styles and realize that Terence Crawford, each one of these guys presents something that Terence Crawford presents, with the exception of the switching from southpaw to orthodox. But that athleticism and all that is represented in large parts by Shawn Porter, and then that precision catching when you're throwing punches with Danny Garcia. Those are just really, really high-level fighters that Errol is handling. I wouldn't say easily, but he's handling them according to a plan. And he is definitely, if he's not head and shoulders above those guys, he is definitely half a head better than those guys. And consistently fighting that level of competition is going to be trouble for Terence Crawford because he's not seeing any of these problems presented to him. Any of them, because he's fighting a lower level opposition. So at the end of the day, Danny Garcia went away because Errol won that. I think Errol said that he is open for a Shawn Porter rematch that I think and he thinks is going to probably wind up being the same type of fight. And hopefully that we can get the Terence Crawford fight. But I'm telling you, for you Terence Crawford fans, you would be really good. It'd be a good idea if Terence Crawford got into the deep water with somebody before he gets in there with Errol, because Errol is well versed in that deep water at this point in time in his career. But anyway, that's my take on the situation. You let me know what you think. Also, follow me on Instagram, follow me on Twitter. And with that, I'm out. Peace.